Hi everybody, Steven Kent Mirassou of Wine Saves Lives. I'm here with my compadres, my family, my fellow winemakers for the Steven Kent Winery and L'Autre Côte Cabernet Franc by the Steven Kent Winery to talk a little bit about, or a lot of bit about Cab Franc. The harvest, the 22 harvest is finally over. We are right on the heels of Cab Franc Day, Sunday, December 4th. And we wanted to get a chance to revisit a couple of wines, one that has been released already and one that will soon be released. Two different vineyard sites, both amazing, both different. And if you like Cab Franc, I think that there's some keys here in thinking, drinking, and then thinking and talking about Bates Ranch from the Santa Cruz Mountains and Gilmedi Vineyard from the Livermore Valley that will help shed some light on the Loire Valley as well, kind of the spiritual home of Cab Franc. And I just want to kind of get my fellow winemakers' impressions about, anything to do with Cab Franc, about the harvest this year and about these wines. We're going to dig in here. Bates Ranch, very small production, is going to be available probably in February, late January, early February. We have about 60 cases or so, something along those lines. We will have more down the road. But this is a venue, that makes it sound so prosaic. It's a fucking magical place. This is a place that is going up this windy dirt road from 200 feet above sea level at the bottom of the hill to 1,200 feet at the top of the hill is like going 150 years in the past. It's mostly a cattle ranch. There are 16 acres of vines among 1,000 acres of property, and it smells a certain way when you're going through the trees and going through the weeds. It looks a certain way, it feels a certain way. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's an absolutely magical place that happens to grow incredibly gorgeous fruit. So that's kind of Bates Ranch. We'll talk a lot more about Bates Ranch down the road. We'll have video of the site, talk about why it's so special, talk about the vineyard manager, Prudy Fox, who's a great friend and an incredibly talented vineyard person. And we'll talk about these wines, Cab and Cab Franc, as we go down the road as well. But anyway, first impressions. We've got Gilmedi Vineyard on the left, 2019, just been released. Actually, this wine was just been released. And then on our right, we've got Bates Ranch 2020, which will be out January, February.
Gilmedi's always been a staple for us as far as Cab Franc. It's just a stunning site in itself, but Cab Franc especially goes really well there. Cabernet especially as well. We love Merlot. I mean, just really great for Bordeaux varieties, but it's been cool to kind of open up some of these older ones, more recently, to kind of see how they age, and they are just beautiful wines and age wonderfully as well. And I think for Bates, Steven was saying we want to get more content out to you guys about Bates, because we went there, gosh, it was in the middle of the pandemic for the first time, because Prudy had said, come out here. And all three of us just completely head over heels fell in love with the place. And then we got to taste the wines from the place, and it was like, okay, well, this is something really special. So the 20 Bates Cab Franc is something we're so excited to get that in people's glasses, because this is our first vintage of this. And we poured some at Cab Franc Palooza, and it was really popular. So we're excited to get this wine out to people finally, because we worked really hard on it, and the site is just, yeah.
Gilmedi was planted back in 1999, 2000. It was a vineyard that was planted in the southern part of Livermore Valley as a consequence of a country club being put up by former partners of mine. And in this part of Livermore, we have an agricultural preserve of a sort. If you build houses, you have to mitigate your building of stuff by giving a certain number of acres to a land trust, to the Tri-Valley Conservancy, that then watches over this property, and it's meant for use for agricultural use forever. So unlike San Jose, where my family's vineyards are now houses and nothing but houses and streets, the southern part of Livermore will always have agricultural land at hand. And the Gilmedi Vineyard was one of those vineyards that was planted. It's 64 acres on a 100-acre parcel.
How many have Cab Franc?
Only fewer than 4. I think it's 3.6 or something along those lines. And had we known more at that point, had I kind of stumbled onto Chinon and Bourgogne at Kermit Lynch's store, prior to that, I would have said, hey, look, we need to plant a lot more Cab Franc. As it is, there's a lot of Cab Franc that's going into other places in Livermore, and as Gilmedi needs to be replanted over the course of the next probably 5 or 6 years, a lot more Cab Franc will go there. We only have one clone there. There are a number of clones, not to the same extent that you'd find the clones from Pinot Noir or even Cab available, but that give you kind of the budwood from the Livermore Valley as well as from Bordeaux. And this is a kind of a magical site unto itself. It's eastern foothills of the Livermore Valley up against what is now the Altamont Pass, a little bit south of that, but the same little range. And it goes up to about 1,000 feet. All of the cold air that comes in from the bay every afternoon kind of pulls up against the hillside there and sits on top of Gilmedi. So it's the last vineyard to break buds in April, late April and May. It's also the last major vineyard here to be harvested. And so it's a special site that works really well with Bordeaux varieties that work well in cooler weather like Cab Franc, like certain clones of Merlot and the like. And it's a site that the Cab Franc has really kind of come into its own, I think, over the last number of years. Aidan, you've been on the winemaking team for, I don't know, 7 or 8 vintages now. That kind of corresponds to when we sort of started being really serious about Cab Franc. And 11 and 15 were challenging years.
We're kind of spoiled as winemakers to have that material. I won't speak for you, but I think I've known you to say that, you know, some of the best wines we've ever produced as winemakers under our label were Cab Francs from Gilmedi. So our standards for Cab Franc are very high. The fact that Bates attracted us as winemakers as a fruit source says a lot in and of itself, I feel like. And even though they're very different, they're both amazing. I love them structurally. And Gilmedi has not just been a source of Cab Franc for Cab Franc, but also for like a major part of our blending material as well for lineage. So yeah, one of my favorite varieties that we work with.
Absolutely, and it's held in very high esteem by us because, you know, when we started Steven Kent Winery back in 1996, we were a Cabernet house. We had one cab from a single vineyard with the goal that we wanted to make Cab from Livermore, knowing the history of the valley, knowing the viticultural constituents of this area, characteristics of this area, that we should be able to make Cab here that's as good as Napa, Sonoma, and anywhere else. And we, I think, have accomplished that over the course of the last 25 years. And it's really kind of been in the last 5 or 6, 7 years where it's become sort of obvious to me that winemaking, if you make a little bit more than you can drink, you have to sell it. So it becomes a business, and it is a business, and it's the best business in the world, but it's a difficult business. There's a lot of competition. We have kind of hung our hat on Cabernet Sauvignon since the very beginning, and that's fine, except that when you're competing in a marketplace where Napa is undoubtedly the king and will always be the king of that variety, if you can do something else extremely well, you put yourself in a different kind of position as far as competition goes. You compete with a smaller group of wineries with a variety that is much less planted by about 20 times in terms of acreage in California, and you're sort of maybe a slower build than we want it to be, although I think there's some momentum being built here too.
In the valley, in the whole valley.
Certainly in the valley.
We're not the only ones focusing on this variety.
Exactly. There's a slow build in gaining an audience and gaining an audience that's not only consumers for direct-to-consumer business, but that's out there at restaurants and wine shops as well. Cab Franc, much more though than maybe a smart decision in terms of what variety we focus on, is to me the most compelling and alluring and delicious and sexy grape out there. We love wine. We drink a lot of wine, the three of us. We drink a lot of wine together. We drink a lot of wine in the morning and in the afternoon and in the evening.
Don't tell our secrets.
We are wine lovers. We're passionate about wine. We're passionate about making it. We're passionate about drinking it. We look at it, I look at it anyway, as it's one of those things that helps me to live an aesthetic life, not just a craft life, which I think winemaking is a craft to a degree. I think wine blending is maybe more where the art, if there is such a thing, comes into play, but it gives us an opportunity of working with our senses all the time. And with Cab Franc, it's a much more transparent grape than Cabernet Sauvignon is. It's more akin to Gamay and Pinot Noir than it is to Cab, even though it's the parent of Cabernet Sauvignon. There's a way of expressing ourselves artistically, aesthetically, through this grape that is more dynamic and more exciting than with any other variety that I have worked with up to this point. So there's very much a reason that's beyond business, that's beyond just a love of the flavor of a certain variety. There's this checks all of those kind of boxes of I want to make something beautiful for people. We want to make something beautiful for people, and there's no better grape in the world, I think, to express that desire and to really give people the opportunity of tasting something that's going to blow their socks off eventually than Cab Franc. And describe your perfect Cab Franc, or your idea about when we're talking about winemaking, both of you, what is it you're looking for from Cab Franc with respect to our own wines?
Well, Cab Franc, I think, is a little bit more difficult's not the right word, but needs more care than some other varieties, and I think that's one of the things we all like a challenge, all three of us, and we also love the grape variety for what it actually is. But Cab Franc is difficult because if you pick it too early, it's very green, bell peppery. If you pick it too late, it loses all the herbalness that makes it Cab Franc. If you put new wood on it, it makes it woody and not Cab Franc-y. And I was going to see if we can see the puncheons. No, but these are regular size barrels here. And then we use puncheons, which are a little over twice the size of regular barrels. And that seems to help us keep, the purity of Cab Franc, kind of help it structurally, but not change it flavor-wise. And then, I think Cab Franc for us is something that we're constantly looking at in the vineyards, almost more than Cab, because it's picking it at that right time is so, so vitally important. And I like tasting other Cab Francs from around Livermore and around the world, because when you get it right, it's just so beautiful and so interesting, and there's so many different complexities and interweavings of flavors, and structurally it's so much more different than Cab that needs to lay down for a while and you just are hit with this, tannin. Cab Franc kind of has this beautiful acidity that kind of runs through it, and a little grip of tannin at the end, and I think it's one of the most exciting wines for me is when I find one that's just really beautifully cared for and done. It really is an exciting experience.
What about the wood aspect of things? The wood aspect of our élevage, our growing up of the wine. What is it that we're looking at?
I totally agree with everything Beth said in terms of it needing a little bit more care. I don't use the word delicate because it's complex.
It can be hard to punch down too.
Exactly. But yeah, it's a grape that I love the pure expression of the aromatics and the flavors and the acidity and that come with it naturally, and you don't really want to hide that with a bunch of new wood or time in barrel just in general. I in particular love very acid-driven wines, and I love wines where the raw fruit aspects, not necessarily fruitiness, but the complexity of the flavors shines through more than the wood impact. That's personally why I prefer Cab Franc to like Cabernet Sauvignon. But it's just an exciting grape to use because along with that complexity comes a lot of versatility. So not just the expression of Cab Franc itself, but what it can add to blends, Bordeaux blends in particular. So.
And that's really the history of Cab Franc in California, up to the last probably, 7 or 8 years, maybe 5 years, something along those lines. French wine, big French wine, is usually Bordeaux. People who know wine to a certain degree, who like Cabernet Sauvignon will think of Bordeaux first. And you think of the left bank of Bordeaux, it's mostly Cabernet Sauvignon, then Merlot generally is the second most voluminous grape in the blend, and then Cab Franc will be down below that. Right bank, Merlot, Cab Franc, and then a little bit of Cab. Cabernet Franc, and we've used it as a blender here for a long time, not only with lineage, but early on with some cabs that we've done for Steven Kent as well. And it adds verve. It adds aliveness. It adds litheness. It adds a suppleness. It adds a muscularity more like a gymnast than a weightlifter. There's something. It's a wine of great tension to me, it seems. And when you add it in the right percentages, with Cab and Merlot, it just makes the whole blend, it lifts the whole blend up a little. It makes it completes it, makes it sing. You know, you have this, not ponderous necessarily, but you have these blends of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon that can be very big, can be black fruited, especially with Merlot, can be very tannic, especially with Cab. And then you add the right amount of the right kind of Cab Franc, and it seems to elevate. It seems to light the room up a little. You know, turns the light switch on, and then you see how the beauty of this blend. And we still use it in blends. And we have, I think, discovered, maybe not be exactly the right word, but we have, I think, realized now that Cab Franc by itself, made in the right way, is just a wine of not only great versatility, which it is, not only a wine of great beauty, which it is, but it's a wine that is, it's a wine that is so incredibly not only beautiful, but just adds a sense of kind of what can be when I'm drinking wine. The experience in the glass is sort of maybe a wish fulfillment in a certain way, but there's a sense to me that Cab Franc is waiting, good Cab Franc is waiting for the receptive drinker, because it sort of starts to preen a little and starts to really show off all that can be when you bring someone who appreciates, again, not delicacy or fragility exactly, but a really wide kind of catalog of fruit flavors and a wide catalog of structural differences and structural depth in terms of acidity and how it plays with tannin. It's just one of those wines that to me is way more than just a beverage and way more than just a good glass of wine. There's something magical. It just really locks into your the emotional component of the drinker, and just kind of tells you how beautiful you are, I guess is what it is.
Well, it's been exciting for us too, because we still will continue to do the single vineyard wines from Steven Kent. We still love the vineyards we work with for that. And so creating a whole brand, L'Autre Côte, for Cab Franc was something, we wanted to continue to kind of experiment with Cab Franc, and we all knew we loved it so much. So creating a brand for it means we can do things like a single vineyard, Bates Ranch Cab Franc, because we have a place for it, and we can really work on bringing you some stunning wines. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's been cool for us recently, I think, is that we've been to a couple different wine events and things like that, and we're usually the only Cab Franc there.
Right.
And we've been bringing the L'Autre Côte, and it's been very exciting to see people's reactions to it, and I feel like it's kind of a divisive kind of wine in a way, where you either love it or you hate it. Yeah. And a lot of people are really kind of jumping on the bandwagon and loving it because it's unique, it's different, it's delicious. There's so much to be said about it, and so that's been really fun for us to be able to, every so often, go outside of Livermore and showcase this wine and have people respond to it just in such an awesome way. And so it's a little, it was a little risky for us to kind of just go full in on Cab Franc, and I think that we're working really hard to make it happen, and we're excited to see how people are kind of coming around to this grade.
Do you agree with Beth that it's a polarizing variety?
I think it has been in the past, and I like to think that it's because people just aren't doing it well and the way they should be.
That's a good point.
In my opinion. There are certain flavor characteristics that if you aren't careful about them getting out of control, like the pyrazine and the greenness of it, it can be off-putting to some people. I like the whisper of it when it's done right, because along with that acid and that energy, there's also the spectrum of the earthy kind of dried herb flavor of things, like the spiciness. And for one reason, as a winemaker, that I love working with it is because of that combination of the structure and those flavor characteristics. It takes me the most to the vineyard in my mind than any other variety that we work with.
That's a great point.
And it's interesting too, because the Bates, as I'm smelling it, it smells like Bates.
Yeah.
Like it smells like the site. It's pretty cool.
I was just going to say, that's a great point. I mean, I think all great wines become greater or become great in the first place because they reflect a place and a time. I think they also reflect a winemaker's philosophy about what it is they're trying to accomplish. And with those three ingredients, and obviously being careful and clean in a cellar and all those kinds of things that are part of sort of just the being careful about your work every day, you get an opportunity to make something that's really special. And when you find special sites like Bates and like Gilmedi, you, as winemakers, I feel as if I owe care and attention to them, because they're not your run-of-the-mill vineyard, and they have magic to provide. It's our job to help unlock that magic or help bring the magic to life, as it were, and it's a great deal of fun. I was just getting back to the polarizing aspect of Cab Franc. I think that there is a polarizing aspect to Cab Franc, and I think it is because people don't do it well sometimes.
And like Aidan said too, if it's too green, then people say, "Oh my gosh, I'm just drinking bell pepper." And if it's too over oaked, then it tastes like Cabernet Sauvignon light.
Exactly.
And so those are kind of ways in my mind that it has the variety has kind of been failed by winemakers at that point in time.
Exactly. I mean, you can spend a lot of money on Napa Valley Cab Franc that structurally is not that different than the Cabernet Sauvignon they produce, but it tastes nothing like what Cab Franc should taste like. It doesn't have that
roundness in the middle, but it's lacking that acidity that it should have. And
there's a precise kind of knife edge, I think, to really good Cab Franc. But I just want to make one last point about polarizing, if this is a thing, and I think that it is a thing sometimes, is that I like that aspect of things. I like the fact that we're working with a grape that isn't easy to do. Cabernet Sauvignon is generally pretty easy to make. If the season was a good season and you farmed well, and again, you're careful, it's much more forgiving of bad circumstances than Cabernet Franc is, or than Merlot is. And I like the idea that we're taking on a challenge every year of trying to walk a real thin edge, a knife's edge of starting out with the picking decisions in the vineyard that gives us a wine ultimately that expresses this pyrazine, methoxypyrazine component in wine grapes, especially it's called the Carmenet family of grapes, the Bordeaux family of grapes, Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot, Carmenere, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, that is sort of thought to be kind of like a natural insecticide. It's a component in the skins of the grape that metabolizes out with direct sunlight. So the riper the fruit gets, the more sunlight that hits the skins, the less pyrazine you have. And this herbal quality can be expressed in a bunch of different ways. It's the cat pea in Sauvignon Blanc. It's the jalapeno, the fresh jalapeno in Sauvignon Blanc. It is the dried sage bay of Merlot. It is the chili pepper in Cab Franc made the right way. It's the green pepper, the bell pepper of Cab Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon that's not ripe enough. And so in order to express the variety and to give the variety a sense of to give the drinker a sense of what Cab Franc really is supposed to be, there's got to be some component of pyrazine there in my mind. If you've let it hang too long, in the vineyard, and you're at 26, 27 bricks, there's no green there anymore, and you lose out on the acidity of the fruit, as well as one of those absolute inherent characteristics of the variety that it needs to express itself. And that again is partly why I like working with this, is you got to be careful. You got to be imaginative about sort of what it means to express a bunch of different aromatic and flavor components across this, this long journey in your mouth, hopefully, and to do it in a way that is true to the variety and not too far over one side or the other.
And I think that goes even before. I mean, we were talking about picking decisions and winemaking, but it goes even further back to if you're growing Cab Franc and you don't really know what you're doing, if you leaf thin too much and you end up with more direct sunlight, then you get all of that out of the variety, or if you overcrop or things like that. So it's a very particular grape in the vineyard as well, and it all starts there. So
it tends to be vigorous, so you do need to keep a little bit of control over how much you're set and then what you prune and drop and that kind of thing. So we promised we'd talk about these two wines sort of side by side. And it's going to be fun to think about this as we get the Bates Ranch released and get it into people's mouths and get conversations going with you. What's different about them?
I think they're very different.
I think they're very different as well. And
that's what's so cool for us as winemakers, is they're both very expressive of Cab Franc, but from two very different places. So it's cool.
So what's different about them?
Well, I'll say mine, and this is what I love about wine too, is we all may disagree, which is perfectly fine. Gilmedi to me always has that chili pepper. It's redder fruited. It has this beautiful, the herbal kind of comes more as a like adobo chili, and a little bit of maybe some sage as well. And very linear to me, but has a really nice kind of, it's developing, as it's aging, it's developing a little bit more of a richness to it and a roundness to it. But I love being able to do single vineyard. I mean, these are both 100% Cab Franc and 100% from that vineyard. The Bates to me is a much bigger wine, but it also is a little bit more Loire style. There's a little bit more of a blacker fruit. The fruit is a little more prominent to me. And it's interesting to me because I get a little bit more of that, and again, I can't describe it, you can only know it by being at the site, but it gets this very interesting kind of dusty,
yes.
Like dried grass type of thing to it, which is just quintessentially Bates Ranch. So it's
a dusty tannin, kind of a powdery tannin to the wine on the finish that kind of mimics or sort of reflects the soil. It's very sandy soil there. Aidan, what do you think?
I pretty much agree with all of that. One thing that's interesting that you know about the Gilmedi is that like chili pepper flavor that's so prominent, and I definitely agree. Even when it's fermenting in box, and it's interesting because we're still learning new things about working with these grapes all the time, and
always, never stop learning.
Yeah, never stop learning, and you can smell that. That particular flavor profile will develop and be more and more prominent as it ferments. And even the yeast that we select impacts how prominent that is and how much it comes through if we look at the different boxes.
2021, it was so prominent.
It was so interesting.
Well, in 22 as well. And we actually, in 22, we pressed separately.
Yes.
So we'll have to, maybe we'll end up bottling those separately or what, but we did separate yeasts and still boiled down separately for separate yeasts. Anyways, continue. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to hit on that. And then just personally, I love the structure of the Bates that hits all of the juxtaposition of acid and tannin that I just love. That kind of like wild fruit characteristic that I love as well.
One of the things that Bates has that Gilmedi doesn't have to me, and it's interesting. I've been drinking Livermore Valley wine for a while now, quite a while, and it's Chinon and Bourgogne and Semur Champagny, the kind of major appellations of the Loire. The wines, when you smell them and taste them, you immediately know what they are. They're hard to describe sometimes. But what clicked in my mind and kind of threw a light on Bates for me, and maybe it was vice versa, is there's a root vegetable characteristic to the Loire Valley wines. Those wines are less fruit forward, less fruit driven than California. Bates has that kind of radish.
Almost kind of like you pull it right from the ground, radish type thing, or there's a little dirt on it
or
still.
Turnip, or whatever you want to describe it. But there's an earthiness. Reminds me of the Sonoma Coast Pinot Noirs we used to make for La Rochelle. There was always this really neat aspect of root vegetable there that made the wine more complex, or that cemented it as a certain place. The fact that I get that more in Bates is interesting to me. I mean, the Bates Cab Franc's at 200 feet. There's only one block of Cab Franc at the site. There's 3 different blocks of Cab that run up the hill.
So the first thing you see is you turn the corner of the Bates too, is the Cab Franc block.
And it's in sand. It produces practically 0 fruit. I mean, it's probably 4 or 5 acres of Cab Franc, maybe a little bit less than that, but produces 5 or 6 tons, and there's not a lot of fruit that comes off the
And
site.
when was that planted? I can't remember.
I don't remember either, but it was not, the vineyard was planted in Cabernet at first in 1970.
Cab Franc was after.
Cab Franc was after that. I'm not exactly sure
We'll
when.
find out and let you know in
Yes.
the comments.
Yes, we'll let you know. But it's there's that part of the vineyard seems to be, it gets sunlight to be certain, but it's really kind of overshadowed by the hill, by the mountain itself. So there always seems to be cool, like kind of like a, after a hot day you want to go in the cool in the shade, and that's kind of what this vineyard reminds me of down on the floor. There's definitely a darker fruited aspect, I think, to the Bates, more of that root veg kind of thing. There's an acid drive to the Bates. It's just fucking stunning.
One of my favorite.
I mean, it's just, it's not scathing. It's just shy of scathing, but I think with food, unbelievable. I think that together there's there are similarities in terms of acid drive, but Bates seems a little bit more pace as far as acid goes. And it's interesting because this 2020 was our first vintage from Bates, and I have fallen in love and hated this wine alternatively 7 or 8 times in the last 3 years. Loved it in the fermenter, did not like it at all out of barrel for the longest time.
It's so Santa Cruz-y in that way. It needed time. And we were just like, oh my gosh, what did we do? We almost didn't get it the next year.
Yes,
and
that's
We
true.
were just so unsure of it, and then all of a sudden it just blossomed into something beautiful.
Broke out of that funk.
It was so weird for a long time.
It's been a challenge for us in all the best ways, because we've learned a lot from this little wine.
Patience sometimes is the thing that you just need to not do anything and let time take its course.
Those 3 barrels.
Exactly. It's 3 barrels of wine. That's why there's 60 cases or whatever in this first finish, and probably will not be a ton more from there because it's just not a very big vineyard for Cab Franc. In 22, we were lucky enough to get 4 rows of Zayante Vineyard, which is another vineyard in the Santa Cruz Mountains, but kind of like in the heart of the Santa Cruz Mountains in Felton, outside of Scotts Valley, 1,300 feet above sea level. Really cool, organically farmed, dry farmed, own-rooted vineyard.
And it's like 4 rows of Cab Franc, and
they kind of wind like this, and there was 0 yield. We got 0.45 tons of something like that. So the 22 vintage is a Santa Cruz blend of Zayante and Bates.
I'm very
delicious,
excited for that wine.
Really excited. It was a volume concern. There was no way to press off one partial bin.
And they actually, it was funny because we were trying to figure out what are we going to do with this. Are we going to press it on top and try to keep them separate? I mean, would that even fill a barrel? Probably not. And then we were kind of tasting them together and going, well, holy cow, actually, this is supposed to be that they're just supposed to be, they want to be together anyways. Listen to them.
Yeah, I mean, there's something, God, every time I go back into Cabernet Franc, there's something new. With most great wines, that's the case. And I want to, throw shade on the other variety because it maybe isn't quite as expressive as Cab Franc is, but there's magic in this grape. And our job as winemakers is to try to bring that forward every year. Our job my job as the owner of the brand and the family is to move this forward. It's to carve out a niche for ourselves as the preeminent producer of Cab Franc in the U.S., which is our goal, and to find a couple of other sites that are really magical that will give us something different and something equally as stunning and alluring.
To showcase Cab Franc from different areas,
which is. I have dreams about the Loire, but we'll let them percolate for a while. We hope that you enjoyed this video about Cab Franc. We look forward to pouring the Bates Ranch for you and releasing our 2019 L'Autre Cote, which is a blend of Cab Franc and Cab for our allocation members in March. But, one thing we didn't talk about, we'll spend 30 seconds on this because this is worth the video unto itself. When I say Cab Franc Blanc, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Deliciousness? I don't know, what is that?
That's perfect, great. Okay. So we experimented this year and we made a white wine from Cab Franc from a different block in Livermore. freaking delicious.
And this is another one too where, you know, we've had people, because we've been started to talk about it, and people are like, well, I've never heard that before. Like, why is this cool? And it's like, well, it's cool because it's hard. It's hard to do. We had we picked early so that the acid level is a little higher. The grapes came in just on the other side of this door, and 10 minutes later, it was in the press. Like, you have to like get that, you know, in there quickly so you don't get any, you know, color or any of the, you know, weight pressing down and breaking of the skins. And so we put it right in the press, and very light press, and then fermented it. It was like 3.5 weeks it took to ferment because we did a really cold temperature.
More to come in another video. We talked about Cab Franc Blanc.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention it because
sorry, and then I went off on it because it's very, very cool. Very small.
It is very, very cool. It is awesome, but we will definitely talk to you about that down the road here. If you love Cab Franc, pick out a great bottle of Cab Franc that you can find anywhere in your store. If you're local, we would love that you drink L'Autre because we have, as Beth said, a brand devoted to the magic of Cab Franc. We're working hard to try to make it special for you and for us. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, please hit us up in the comments on Wine Saves Lives, Steven at winesaveslives.com. If you have any other questions you want to email, we're happy to answer. Thank you very much. Cab Franc Day is Sunday. Happy Cab Franc Day. Drink something delicious. Take care of yourself and your family. Cheers.
Cheers.
Drink
Patient.
Lost my thing on my watch. Gosh darn it. Yeah, please. Do the old